Hi, my name is Drake Greenwood, and I'm here to talk to you today about Pete Rose and his betting on baseball in the Outside the Lines video by Bob Lee, discussing this whole saga about him and betting on baseball. First, I'd like to show you my Pete Rose signed baseball right there. Pretty cool. It's by Pete Rose and Nolan Ryan. It's one of my favorite possessions. Just a little something to show that I'm picked this video because my dad growing up when he was a kid was a huge Big Red Machine fan. His favorite player was Johnny Bench, so obviously with that connection he rooted for Pete Rose. So we have a bunch of Pete Rose Big Red Machine memorabilia around our house, and that's one of my favorites. So Pete Rose in this video talks about his long baseball career and baseball life and the drama surrounding it, and how he, for a long time, was suspected of betting on baseball and had a gambling addiction and problem. And Bob Lee really gets in depth from the beginning to the end of his career, to where he started off as a player for the Reds and was doing great, and nobody ever really thought he was betting on baseball. But as his career progressed, he got older, became the all-time hits king. He had over 4,000 hits, unbelievable accomplishment. And then eventually he became the player manager for the Reds. And throughout this whole time, it was known that he was a gambler, but it was not known that he gambled on baseball. So he gambled off the field, obviously. So he liked to gamble on horses, liked to gamble on college basketball, football even, but he was losing. So he was tied with some kind of a sketchy crowd. Pete's kind of from humble beginnings in Pittsburgh. He's a hard-working, tough guy. His name, nicknamed Charlie Hustle. He basically invented or popularized the head first slide. I've watched multiple videos outside of this one just about him and his life. And he talks about how he wasn't the most talented. He wasn't the best player, yada yada yada, but etc. But he was always the toughest. He would never be let somebody be tougher than he was, and he was always, the only thing he cared about was winning and whatever he could do to make his team win. So winning is big to him, and the way Pete describes it is that he was really struggling, betting, losing a lot, running with this tough crowd, a lot of mob implications, and he was betting on sports other than baseball. And since he didn't know that much about those sports, he was losing, and he hates to lose. So he figured once he kind of got in the hole and had some money problems, I need to make some money. I need to start winning, and he cared a lot about winning. So he realized that he knows a lot more about baseball than other sports. So he started kind of betting on baseball, and it was only when he was a player, or it wasn't only from what he says was when he was a manager, never as a player, although there's some information that I'll get into later about him betting as a player. And it was through a bookmaker. He didn't make bets himself. This is what he claims. Again, this is all what he claims, not necessarily what the evidence states. And the books were through the mob, and he was running with these tough mob characters, and it was some bad people. But he never bet against the Reds to lose. He only bet on the Reds to win. He would bet on other baseball games, not in pertaining to the Reds. And he said he never had a problem. He never bet without outside of his means. He didn't bet his house, that type of deal. So he was betting basically for fun on a sport he thought he could win in, trying to get out of this gambling hole or debt hole. But it was never like he was out of money. He just wanted to start winning mainly. So that's all what Pete says. And he said he did it over a 2-year span, 87 to 89. When he was the Reds manager. Again, he never bet on the Reds to lose. He only bet on them to win. Now, with the information that the commissioner's office, this is over a three different commissioner period, so it's been a long time. Pete Rose has been involved in baseball, his entire life, basically. So, the commissioner's office did an investigation on Mr. Rose, and they found some condemning evidence that he was obviously betting, and that is a major violation of the baseball code and rule book, and states that if you bet on baseball, you cannot, you'll be permanently banned from baseball if you're playing, if you're involved with it. So they found that he was placing, after batting practice, he would go into the clubhouse and call from, as the manager, call from the clubhouse phone to his friend who would then place a bet with the bookmaker. And that was Lowell Stimson. Again, Pete discredits that. He says that's not the case. He never called from the phone. So there's a bunch of he said, she said with what the reports say, what the evidence say, and what Pete says. So it's kind of a thing. But it is clear that Pete did bet on baseball at one point in his career as a manager, for sure. Still somewhat unclear as a player. How this came out, and the guy that Pete was betting with was named Bertolini, and Bertolini got arrested, and through another investigation, his books and records were found, and that was the main thing that the commissioner's office used, and the evidence they had against Pete was through that. So now it's come back to where Pete is now in this limbo of, is he, so he's, right now, he's, as it stands, he's banned from baseball for life. He's not allowed in Major League Park. He's not allowed to be affiliated with any Major League team. He basically can't go to a game unless he's invited by the team for special purposes through permission through the commissioner's office, which like happens when the All-Star game was in Cincinnati a couple years back. They allowed him to come back and be a part of the festivities. When they allowed the Reds to honor him with a statue outside their facility. So it's usually with the Reds because that was his team, and that's where he became famous. But he's still kind of in this limbo of being banned. So what I think is, first off, Pete, although being a great baseball player and just a classic baseball player of just toughness and just kind of what the game of baseball embodies in my mind, of just being tough and just willing to be a grinder and eat dirt and just do whatever it takes to win, Pete has kind of dug himself a hole where he clearly bet, and he kind of lost all of his credibility about what he said because he lied about it for so long, saying that he never bet on baseball when it came out and said that he did. I mean, he lied about it for a really, really long time. So now when he comes and says, I want to be honest, you kind of don't know what to believe him. So it makes, it's a tough situation what to believe from Pete, and I think that's kind of up to the commissioner to decide what he wants to do with Pete. And Rob Manfred, more so than Bud Selig, has been very open to at least hearing him out, not necessarily reinstating him. As it stands today, he's still not, he's still banned from baseball. I think eventually, before Pete dies, that he'll be unbanned. Maybe not during Rob Manfred's tenure, but maybe later in Rob Manfred's tenure. And the reason being is it still hasn't been proven that he bet while he was a player, and he will never go into the Hall of Fame as a manager, but there's an argument to be made that he could go into the Hall of Fame as a player. I mean, he's clearly, without a doubt, without this betting scandal, a Hall of Famer. He never took steroids. There's nothing to his name about that, and he leads Major League Baseball in all-time hits with a record that will probably never be broken. So, with that being said, I think Pete probably has served his time. It's clearly weighs on him. He clearly is upset about the whole betting thing. He wishes it hadn't happened. He says he no longer bets on baseball. From all sources that have come out and said they agree with him, they think that's true, and he's being honest about that. He does still bet on horses, but that's a little different. He owns a horse, and he kind of gambles with that. But he doesn't bet on baseball anymore, according to everybody around him. So I think Pete will eventually find himself back in baseball in the next, probably, let's say 10 years. I think Pete's in his 60s now, maybe even 70s. I think he's a really good chance before his life ends to make it back into baseball and make him the Hall of Fame. At the end of the day, when it comes down the field, Pete Rose is probably the most sure case for a Hall of Famer ever, and he's a really great player. He just made a mistake, and he served his time. I mean, he never bet for his team to lose. He never bet against them. He never fixed games. I think it's kind of time where Pete Rose deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. So that concludes my presentation, and thank you so much for listening.